Today's video is a can't miss. I am honored to be joined by the author of the Starch Solution, a board-certified physician with over 50 years of experience, and simply put, a true legend, Dr. John McDougall. Last time I had him on the channel, I asked you, the viewers, to comment the word encore if you wanted him to come back, and let's just say the response was overwhelming. And the great news, Dr. McDougall said he was happy to come back. If you're new to this space, hey, I'm Healthy Emmie. I'm a nutritionist, a weight loss specialist, and the creator of the Slim on Starch program, where you work with me as well as a mindset coach and a nutrition coach to help you lose weight on a starch-based, plant-based diet. If you want to learn more about how you can work with me and my team, you can click the link in the down bar. I upload new YouTube videos every Wednesday and Saturday, so make sure that you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. If you know me, you know my ducks are always in a row. So before this discussion, I prepared a list of topics and questions that I wanted to delve into surrounding women's health, including fertility, pregnancy, breastfeeding, osteoporosis, menopause, hormone replacement therapy, weight loss, and more. Well, Dr. McDougall came prepared to speak, so those topics expanded even further, and we spoke for an hour and a half before I said, I gotta let you go. You've been so generous with your time. And the discussion topics expanded into the world of hunger, starvation-induced diets, weight loss drugs, protein, osteoporosis, and more. You are in for a treat. Get your pen and your paper out because you're going to want to take notes. And if you want me to have Dr. McDougall back again to continue this conversation, comment the word encore. So starting in the realm of childbearing age and speaking to women that are pregnant, something that I've heard you say, which I love, is pregnancy is not a disease. So we don't need to treat it like we take crazy dietary intervention. You know, you mention in this book that it takes 80,000 calories to grow a baby, which is about 250 to 300 per day. So we don't need to take these drastic measures when it comes to getting more protein or getting more of certain vitamins and minerals and nutrients. Let's address the protein thing. So with doing research through your book, I had written down a few things. That scientific research dating back to the 1950s says that we need about 2.5% of our daily calories from protein. And in the 70s, the World Health Organization doubled that to 5%. And you talk about how the people of Papua New Guinea, for example, have about 3 to 5% of their daily calories from protein. Now, you mentioned that for pregnant women, it's suggested to get 6% of daily calories from protein, and for breastfeeding women to get about 7% of their daily calories from protein. And we know that, potatoes are 10%, oats are 11 to 15%, rice is 9% protein. My question is, where does that 6% figure come from for pregnant women for protein?
I think it's just based upon the fact that, there have been 100 billion babies born to women who've lived on diets that have been.
So at this point, Dr. McDougall was having some issues with his video, so he left the Zoom and came back, and I was able to see him just fine, but for some reason, when I downloaded the Zoom recording, I could no longer see his video anymore. So all of his audio is still here perfectly, so you're going to get a beautiful shot of Dr. McDougall's photo to accompany his voice. Unfortunately, we don't have the video, but we still have all of the knowledge.
Well, it comes from I think initial observation that women have been having babies for, 1 million years on starch-based diets. And, starches, they're not just adequate in protein, they're excessive in protein in terms of always meeting the needs. If you go back to the original scientific nutritional concerns about protein needs, like, for example, the turn of the century between the 19th century and the 20th century, say 100 years ago, researchers at that time considered the protein requirements of the human being to be so low that you never had to consider protein as a necessary nutrient. And then, people did balance studies and, check the urine and, tried to figure out, how much protein resulted in you had to eat that would result in proper metabolism. So it was done through a multitude of studies, but I think probably the best reassurance that women can get, because protein is certainly the most advertised of all nutrients, but it's the most over advertised, and the harms are so underappreciated. I think if women could realize that babies have been born to mothers that have been have had their whole nutrition on foods such as sweet potatoes that are like 3 to 6% protein, depending on whose chart you're looking at it. Like I said, it's a nutrient that's been used extensively by advertisers, and it's probably the most toxic nutrient that is currently overappreciated in our society. Yeah. So, I to answer your question in detail, you'd have to go back and look at some of the balance studies that were done and checking the amount of protein in the urine and, versus how much that you ate. You need a little protein to grow hair, to replace skin. Got a few gastrointestinal tract cells that need to be replaced. But, otherwise, unless you're growing, your needs for protein are quite low. I think another way to look at it is this infant that the mother's going to have here after 9 months of gestation. This infant has a diet, and I think that no one that's listening would disagree with this. It has an ideal diet of human breast milk. And if you look at the content of protein in human breast milk, what you find, it's about 5% protein. So here's a time in life when we're growing most rapidly and the greatest protein needs, when we double in size the first 3 to 6 months of life, and that's a diet of 5% protein. You look around the world and you see that, as I say, various populations living on diets such as rice, which is about 8% protein, and potatoes, which are about 10% protein, and sweet potatoes being about 3 to 6% protein. You see that there's never a problem with protein deficiency. And then, like I say, you look back at the studies. I could tell you a long and interesting story about protein needs. There was a fellow by the name of Carl Voigt. He's a German scientist, and he developed something called the Voigt principle. The Voigt principle was a principle based on our protein needs. And the way Carl Voigt and some of the other researchers at that time determined protein needs is that they made an observation. They observed that people could afford it chose a lot of protein in their diet. In other words, if you had a job that allowed you enough income so you could buy meat, then they bought meat. And what they did is they said that the human being has an innate ability to determine its own protein needs and to make proper adjustments. And he assumed that people who could afford to do it, had the opportunity to do it, would buy the most ideal diet. And so what they determined was that watching these particular men and women who could afford to eat meat, they looked at their protein content in their meal plan and found out it was about 145 grams a day. However, they discounted the fact that people who were working for them, people who were toiling the fields, etc., people in other parts of the world that were less affluent, were living on less than half that amount of protein and were in excellent health. So the way I describe it is that our protein needs were based upon racial bigotry. I mean, bigotry has gone on for a long time. And the assumption that people could afford it, which were primarily white people, would make the right choice of protein needs, and people of color who didn't have that choice, somehow or another, they were supposed to be protein deficient. Of course, they weren't. They had no problem at all. And protein deficiency has never been described in the world literature. There's no such thing. You have no friends with protein deficiency. It's impossible to occur unless you have a synthetic diet. But all natural foods contain enough protein to support our needs throughout life. And good grief, how could there be 2 billion Asians living on rice and if it didn't have adequate protein?
Right. I was going to say I have no friends, period. Just kidding.
So you bring up a very interesting study in this book, actually talking about how women in Guatemala, when they were given, two groups, both pregnant, one group was given a protein supplement, and it was found that those getting more protein had higher rates of early delivery, infant mortality. They had more issues with their pregnancies. I know that many women want to err on the side of caution. So they'll say, oh, I'll have a little bit more tofu or have some more beans. So my question is, where do we cross over to the point where it's becoming toxic and it's too taxing on our kidneys, how much protein we're taking in?
Well, the figure that I would give you is, remember, we talked about, sweet potatoes being 6% protein and regular potatoes 10%, rice 8%, and wholemeal 16%. If you get over 15% of the calories as protein, you're in a situation where you start to overwork the kidneys and the liver. If you get up to around 35% protein, then you're in a situation where we have something called rabbit starvation. Rabbit, like with the bunny ears, rabbit starvation. Because what happened was in certain environments, that's all that was available were very lean animals like the rabbit. And when they would rely upon these lean animals for their calorie source, they got very sick. They call it rabbit starvation. And, so excess protein is something that does occur. Protein deficiency, we have to get over it. And I know it's hard. It's hard because, supplements, programs, et cetera, are always focusing on getting enough protein. But the opposite is actually the truth. If that kind of advertisement resulted in better nutrition, what you'd see is all your friends and relatives looked great, were healthy, trim, weren't taking a whole bunch of pills, et cetera. But with that kind of advice that you need to worry about protein, get enough protein, has resulted in a population of people, United States, Europe, and et cetera, where somewhere around 80% of people are obviously sick. Personal appearance, the advice to get plenty of protein has resulted in people eating foods that are so rich in calories and fat that they're almost guaranteed to be overweight. Now, it must be terribly frustrating for people to be in this dilemma. I don't know, men and women, I look at them and I have to believe that they have a desire to be physically attractive, active, and healthy. And they're not. And they don't understand why. Well, why is because of the way we've been taught to eat. It's just plain and simple. In fact, I'd like to just divert for a minute on a subject that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about and making slide presentations about, and that is about hunger. I'd just like to stop with your group for a minute and think about hunger. Some of this work I'm going to talk to you about was based upon research that was done during World War II. It was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. What they did is they wanted to do an experiment to see what hunger really was all about. And it was very appropriate at that time because during World War II in Western Europe, people were starving. Mass starvation all over Western Europe. And so a study was set up by Ansel Keys, where he asked for volunteers, and he got 36 conscientious objectors, men that didn't want to go to battle. And they volunteered for this experiment, which lasted 11 months. First 3 months, they fed them pretty much what they wanted to eat and determined how many calories they needed and wanted to eat. It was about 3,200 calories a day for these men. After the first wash-in period, where they determined their baselines, they asked them to cut their calorie intake in half. So instead of 3,000 calories, they took in about 1,500 calories. In other words, they were suffering from semi-starvation for 6 months. After that, the last 2 months, they refed them, which is something we might get into. But that 6 months was torture for these 36 men. They thought about food all the time. They read cookbooks. They had daydreams. They had nighttime dreams. They protected their plate when they sit down at the dinner table. They, push their elbows out so nobody would get into their food. They would lick their plate when it was, practically empty. They became socially isolated. They lost all interest in sex and in the opposite sex, and they became depressed. It was just overwhelming. that should give you some idea what hunger means. And if that hasn't done it, what I've asked people to do is to find out what hunger is really all about. And the way you can do that, you can discover the meaning of hunger in your life by not eating for a weekend. All right. The first few hours are no trouble at all. Say you start on a Friday night. Saturday morning, no big deal. It's only a few hours before you get to eat again. By Saturday afternoon, you start thinking like these men in the Minnesota starvation experiment. You start thinking about food. And by Saturday night, in other words, 24 hours later, that's all you can think about. A hungry person can only think about food. And you could carry the experiment out for another few hours if you'd like, but it's just pure torture. The hunger drive is overwhelming. It has to be. It's one of the three drives that keeps us alive. And we have the drive for oxygen, in other words, breath, the drive for water, in other words, thirst, and we have hunger, which brings in our calories. We wouldn't survive as a species if it wasn't that intense of a drive. So how do we deal with this drive? This will help you understand why so many people have weight problems, which is what I'm getting to, is people either answer their hunger drive and eat, and because the calorie concentration, the fat concentration of the food that people think is correct, the Western diet, the American diet, the European diet, et cetera, they end up taking in too many calories, and as a result, they become overweight. So the other option you have is what a lot of people do, and I bet everybody's tried it, is they've tried denying the hunger drive. It's called dieting or portion control. And they're in pain all the time. Again, all they think about is food. So that's not acceptable. Here are in a situation where what you eat is fattening and sickening, or you don't eat and you're in horrible pain. You're trying to deny the hunger drive, which you can't do. And you can prove it to yourself in 24 hours. So how do we deal with that? We're in this dilemma. The way that the public has answered this, and of course business has been right in there to help them, is to figure out ways to suppress the hunger drive. Okay, there's a couple of ways to suppress the hunger drive that are very popular. One is you can go on a low-carb diet, in other words, a keto diet, a carnivore diet, the Atkins diet, and you go into a state known as ketosis. You, as a byproduct of fat metabolism, you produce ketones in the blood, which suppress the appetite. All right, so people do that. Unfortunately, to go on a ketogenic diet causes you to eat meat, poultry, fish, cheese, eggs, etc. All the foods you've been taught will give you sickness, constipation to heart disease. So there's one way of dealing with that powerful hunger drive. The next way of dealing with it is to take a kind of new popular drug. Okay, Ozempic would be probably the one that you know about. It's originally a diabetic drug, or Wegovy, which is another one of the semaglutides. You could take these drugs which make you sick, which suppresses your hunger drive. Now, this particular set of drugs, the semaglutides, they are developed from the poison in the lower jaw of the only reptile in the United States called the Gila monster. It's a lizard about that long. And what scientists did is they found out that this lizard had a poison that is equivalent to a diamondback rattlesnake as far as its toxicity. They have figured out that this particular poison suppresses the hunger drive. And they've changed this poison out of the Gila monster's lower jaw. They've changed it in a whole bunch of products that now try and sell you for $1,000 a month, maybe a little more, maybe $1,300 a month, with the promise that it will deal with your hunger drive. Well, the side effects of going on these kinds of shots and pills are significant, to say the least. The way they work is they make people sick. They even talk about it, in some of the advertisements. And if you read any of the research, they cause nausea and vomiting. They cause diarrhea and stomach pains. About 80% of people are ill because of the medication, or they report being ill. So anyway, you got several choices here. Once you decide the hunger drive is unbeatable, you can deny it and be in pain. You can go on one of these low-carb diets and suppress the hunger drive as a result of going into ketosis, or you can take a reptile poison and make you sick. Otherwise, we end up like 8% of the people in Western countries overweight, and not understanding why you can't lose the weight, why you can't get in control. You think you think there must be something wrong with me. I'm an obsessive compulsive overeater. I have an eating disorder. I mean, look at me. I'm just, maybe I got a genetic defect. Maybe my stomach is too big for my body. Oh, I know. Maybe I don't exercise. That's the reason. There's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. Your hunger drive is correct. The stomach is the right size for the body. Your genetics are fine. You really don't need to exercise, even though it is very helpful. What you have to do is you have to figure out what the diet is for the human being. What are people supposed to eat? Because there is a diet. There's got to be a diet that allows you to eat, take in the correct amount of calories so that you're not overweight or underweight. And it causes you to be satisfied, content. I mean, it'd be so unkind of our Creator to design us in such a situation where we had this dilemma of being in constant pain, or having to eat a bizarre diet, or having to take reptile poison. I'm sure they'll figure out some other poison to make you sick. Just doesn't seem right. And the interesting thing, you wanted to start out talking about pregnancy. The interesting thing about pregnancy is when a woman becomes pregnant, what does she do? She eats. She eats a lot of food because she's trying to grow this baby. As you mentioned, it costs 80,000 calories to grow a baby, but only 2 pounds of protein. So she must take in more. Well, when she takes in more vitamins, more minerals, more protein, more essential fats, etc. Never misses, particularly if the right kind of diet she consumes to satisfy her hunger drive. And that diet is a diet based on starch. The appetite responds to sugar. Now, when I say sugar, I particularly mean potatoes and rice and corn and beans and sweet potatoes. And that's the kind of sugar you ought to be thinking about. But that's what satisfies our hunger drive is sugar. You probably know this. I mean, you went through a junior high and high school and maybe some college biology, and you remember that the tip of the tongue tastes with pleasure. Sweet. You have a taste buds for sweet on the tip of your tongue. You're designed as a seeker of sweet, like you have taste buds for salt. You're designed as a seeker of minerals. You also, which is probably new news to a lot of you, you also have powerful taste buds, independent of the sweet tasting taste buds, for starch. You are a starcher. Everything about you is designed to live on a diet of starches, rice, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, etc. And when you do that, you take in just the right amount of protein, the right amount of minerals, right amount of vitamins. The only thing you might miss on is something that I do put some emphasis on, and that is a vitamin called vitamin B12, which we can get into in a minute. But otherwise, a pregnant woman is not a sick woman. She's a hungry woman, and she's got a lot of responsibility there to grow this whole baby with, all the different parts working correctly. So I think that's the biggest dilemma facing people right now, is they just don't understand. Why is it that they've got a hunger drive that somehow won't let them alone? They have to resort to really bizarre things to continue to function. Anyway, I've been teaching. Go ahead.
What I find so insightful about the Ansel Keys Minnesota starvation experiment is if you look at the photos of the men, they're quite alarming and disturbing how thin the men do become. And as you noted, they're eating about 1,500 calories, and most men and women go on diets of 1,200 calories. So, the mental effects that we see and the emotional instability of those on those diets makes sense, as that basic physiological human need is not being met. It's like if you can't use the bathroom or you can't drink water, you can't function.
It's worse than that.
Yes. When you mentioned not eating for a weekend, I thought, no can do.
No, and I think you have to face the fact that hunger is a powerful drive for a reason. Your survival depends on it.
Yeah.
The problem is that we've been taught to eat a diet that is not fit for human beings. And it's a diet that's only been consumed in our history of being around on planet Earth for, say, 1,000,000 years. It's a diet that's been consumed with any level of popularity only for the last 50 to 150 years. Prior to that, just extremely few people who ended up eating a diet that's typical of Americans, a rich food diet with lots of meat and desserts, etc. So the way I state it, which I think kind of covers the whole issue, just like there's never been a case of protein deficiency. The way I try and get people to think about it is by this statement, and that is that all large, successful populations of people throughout all of their verifiable human history have obtained the bulk of their calories from starch. And you start listing some of the populations, like, the Native American. And they've been studied they've been studied for long periods of time, but I have research going back 12,000 years, which showed that the Native American lived on a diet of potatoes and corn. And we could go back, a similar period of time and look at the diet of people of Mexico and Central America, the Aztecs and Mayans. They were known as the people of the corn. In South America, you had people living on potatoes. That's still the primary food in that area of the world. Potatoes was the diet. And, one of the things that you might be able to relate to is when you turn on the evening news, they're talking about countries that are in what is known as the breadbasket of the world: Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Ukraine, etc. It's because the diet of people has been bred. And probably the easiest thing for people to relate to is the diet of the Asian, which is primarily a diet of rice. So get some comfort in history, in geographic locations of populations of people who eat differently than Americans. And I think you could probably come to the conclusion that we're doing something wrong. And there is something to do right.
Well, speaking of, having a diet that's been completely adequate for pregnant women for millions of years, I wanted to chat about supplements. And you've chatted at length about supplements. Just to name a few of your newsletters, you've talked about it in your April 2007, your October 2005, your May 2010. And actually in the October 2005, you say this, you say, taking supplements with as little as 0.8 milligrams a day of folic acid has been shown to increase your risk of dying of heart disease and cancer, according to the results of the first large randomized treatment trial to carefully examine the issue. Folic acid is a biggie for women that are pregnant. And I know
Right.
that women might want to err on the side of caution so as to not have, cleft palates or neural tube defects. So when weighing, what am I going to risk here? What should a woman do if she says, should I risk me getting heart disease or cancer, or should I risk having a baby that has these defects? If it is a woman that is already getting enough foliage from a plant-based diet, from a McDougall style diet.
And that's the trick. That's the secret. Is folic acid comes from foliage, and that's where it was originally discovered in spinach. So folate happens to be the plant form of folic acid. And folic acid is what they say in pills. And it's all derived from foliage, in other words, plants. Well, the typical Western diet is deficient in plants, so it's deficient in folic acid. The interesting thing about this particular supplement that women are told to consume, not when they're just pregnant, but you need to consume it during all of your reproductive years. And the reason is because defects that occur in the infant, the fetus, occur before you even know you're pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just start taking folic acid the day you miss your first menstrual period, but by that time the neural tube defects or the heart defects or cleft palates or whatever have already occurred. And it's really too late. So you say to yourself, this doesn't make any sense that I've got to somehow take vitamin pill. It makes sense if you realize that you were designed to be on a high folate, not folic acid, but folate, in other words, foliage from plants diet. And you'd be naturally consuming this throughout all of your life from, say, 6 months to 2 years of age to, way past menopause. So again, nature's got it right. It's just that we have glimpses of information that we misinterpret. And too often the misinterpretation has to do with profits. Like in the case of folic acid, we're talking about supplement salesmen. This is big business. This is billions of dollars every year for people. Individual salespeople are making millions of dollars selling supplements to people that are not only useless, but they're harmful.
Women tend to be.
And by the way, that's one of the reasons that I'm not as popular among my colleagues as you would think I should be or could be, is because too many of my colleagues have a backroom business of selling supplements. They'll tell you about how important it is to not eat meat and dairy, and you need to eat a whole food plant-based diet. And then on the back end, they say a couple $100 worth of supplements a month. Mm. They're doing well, but it hasn't made me very popular because of the stand I've taken.
So women that tend to be very selfless and want to have a healthy baby for their family, they might say, okay, well, if the risk is me getting heart disease down the line versus having a healthy baby, I'll get extra of that folate that I need from a supplement. Do you believe that there's greater risk in taking the supplement? Could the supplement harm the fetus in any way?
I don't know of any harm to the fetus. What you're talking about is adult studies where, in populations of people where they study, the incidence of disease and death, et cetera. What's found is that the dosages that are recommended to prevent neural tube defects are the same dosages that have been found to increase the risk of cancer, heart disease in the adult population.
So speaking to our pregnant women still, one more question about our pregnant women and then those that have trouble getting pregnant. So I've run into this situation where I'll have a client with obesity who falls pregnant and she'll be doing great on the McDougall style diet. And then she says, well, can I still be losing weight? Is this safe?
If you do it by eating, yeah, it's safe. It's safe. It puts you and the baby at some serious advantages. Being overweight when you're pregnant increases the risk of having complications during delivery, increases your risk of having gestational diabetes and something called eclampsia and preeclampsia, which is a problem with high blood pressure and kidneys and so on. So you're already in big trouble. And, you've been told not to go on a diet when you're pregnant. Because if you restrict the amount of calories that you eat, then the baby's calorie availability is not what it should be. And so the babies are born underweight if you're not eating enough food. But this is not the case when you follow the kind of diet I recommend. It's really important. It's hard for people to get it across to themselves that they need to eat. And if they eat the right kind of foods, then only positive things will happen. And yes, they will still lose weight during their pregnancy, but it'll be by eating a lot of really good, healthy, high vitamin, high adequate protein, plenty of fat food. So you should not be worried about being overweight and going on the kind of diet I recommend, even if you start out, in pretty big trouble. In fact, I know of no other way of turning the course of your pregnancy around other than fixing the food.
Right.
There are no pills. You can do blood pressure pills and supplements and all kinds. It's not going to fix the problem.
So I go in with the mentality of let's focus on getting a really great McDougall style diet in you and having that be the consistent way you eat, and whatever happens with the weight happens with the weight. But at what point do we want to make sure through surveying the weight at certain intervals that the baby is growing at the pace that it should be? Because I do know that weighing in is a part of pregnancy with those doctor's appointments. Is there a point where we say, okay, we don't want you losing anymore, we want you to start to gain?
Your appetite will take care of it. In other words, if you have the right kind of food placed in front of you at the dinner table, in other words, a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables, your appetite will take care of your calorie needs.
Okay.
You won't take in too many, you won't take in too few. You have to rely upon, some adequacy of the human body. It doesn't make bad decisions unless it doesn't have the right opportunities. And of course, I don't know whether what I said is really that true, because, people can go into a restaurant and order a baked potato or a steak, and unfortunately they order the steak, I bet, most of the time. But you don't have to worry about it. Your appetite will take care of it.
Yeah.
But you can't make something right that is so wrong. In my early years in medicine, we're talking about more than 50 years ago, I would serve time in doctors' offices, obstetricians, gynecologists, and so on. And we were so concerned about people gaining weight, women gaining weight at that time, because of the development of eclampsia or preeclampsia, or that what we would do is not only would we put them on calorie-restricted diets, we would put them on diuretics, water pills. The consequence of this kind of professional behavior was we ended up with a lot of underweight babies. And so doctors realized that they can't focus on limited calories. You were told as a woman pregnant at that time that you were allowed 15 pounds of weight gain. And that's based upon the size of the baby, which is, should have been 5, 6, 7 pounds. The placenta, other products associated with gestation. You were told only to gain 15 pounds. Well, when you're confronted with a diet, the Western diet, and you have an appetite, because your body knows it's pregnant. It knows it needs to take in more food to grow this baby. You're in a situation where to maintain a weight of 15 pounds during your entire pregnancy requires some great efforts. You might be so foolish as to go on a low-carb diet, which is dangerous for the baby. I'm sure there's a contraindication for taking Ozempic and Wegovy when you're pregnant. Can't imagine that would be allowed in any good practice of medicine. So again, you have to go back to, I guess, some basic beliefs. And they are prejudices, because I have them. And it starts out with the fact that the human being was designed correctly. You're not a genetic mishap. The responses you have, again, based upon what's available to you to choose, are correct. And with that kind of philosophy, I've been able to help a lot of people. If I started out as a medical doctor with the attitude every time you walked into my office that you are a genetic mishap, or something else is wrong with you that I can't fix, then there's no place to go. You stay the same or get worse. But I take the attitude that you're a healthy person. You just don't have the right information. And with that attitude, I've taken care of, personally, over 12,000 people. And they've all gotten better. I have to say that I don't think I have any trouble saying that, is they've all hearing the message that I teach, not that they've all followed it, or even followed to the point where they've gotten any really obvious results, but they're better off knowing what the truth is, or having some way of looking at things that doesn't condemn them to being overweight and sick.
This is a perfect segue very seamlessly into something I wanted to talk about down the line, but I think it's an opportune time to talk about it. I know that your wife, Mary, after having your third child, said she left the hospital at a weight lower than what she fell pregnant at. And so I wanted to talk for a moment about after delivery of the baby and breastfeeding. You talk at length about it in this book. So I really highly recommend that everybody does pick up this book if they don't already have it. But you note that about 700 to 1,000 calories from breast milk on a daily basis is given to the baby. And a lot of women who are breastfeeding find that they play this tricky dance between I'm hungry all the time and I'm trying to lose weight. But what I hear you saying and what I tell my clients is you can trust the hunger drive so long as it's the correct food, and you'll release the weight that you need to. And you don't need to have extra protein, or you have to have 7% of daily calories, but you don't need to add a whole block of tofu. You don't have to have tons of extra fat. You can trust the hunger drive, eating the McDougall diet when you're breastfeeding. Yes?
Well, 100 billion people have done it, and they've done really well. As I say, you look out, you look at the past human history, the Homo sapien. What you find is that pretty much everybody, with few exceptions, attained the bulk of their calories from starch. And that goes back as far as we can discover in terms of archaeological findings. We can take that back to 2.5 million years, that primates, not human beings, but primates at that time were plant eaters. And various excavations of societies of the past have shown that, starch was the dominant food. But if you stop and think about it for a minute, why would it not be? Well, I can tell you why it would not be, and I will in just a second. But what's available is starch, rice, corn, potatoes, and so on. What's not available is animal foods, because they're difficult to chase down and kill. And we have no refrigeration. We have really no efficient way of preserving the meat. And it usually ends up rotten by the time you bring it back to the village. So I'll tell you why this kind of belief exists. It has a philosophy called the hunter-gatherer. And what we teach is that we were primarily hunters. And the reason we're taught that we're primarily hunters is because of gender bias, sexism. And it's something that's existed probably through all of human time. And that is, male dominance. So who got the credit for the food intake? It was the men. They went out for a couple of weeks, maybe got an animal, maybe didn't, brought it back to the village, and maybe they were the hero of the village for a couple of minutes or whatever. But who really gathered the food for your particular society of people? And the women and the children, which throughout human history, as far as I know, have never gotten the glory. It's the men. So anyway, we've been starch eaters all of our existence, except for modern times. And you can see what's happened to people in modern times. 80% are overweight or obese, half are pre-diabetic, 14% are diabetic, half die prematurely of strokes or heart attacks. And, it's a really sick situation. And it's the food, basically.
So with breast milk, because it can be, fueled through a starch-based diet, with breast milk itself being about 50% fat, do we need to have a higher fat intake in order to produce enough breast milk? You do say in this book, for those wondering, it's on page 69, you say that an adequate milk supply is very rare. But what is the answer to that question? Do we need more fat in order to have enough milk, which is very high in fat?
No, we there's enough fat in our food, like rice. Mm-hmm. Rice is about 8% fat, and there's plenty of fat in the food for the human female to concentrate it to make a food for the baby that's 50% fat. I mean, after all, cows do it, horses do it, giraffes do it. Eating basically grass. They make a food for their offspring that's about 50% fat. So we have no trouble concentrating the fat. Which brings me to another question that should follow, and that is that should you feed a higher fat diet to babies, to infants? And the answer is yes. The National Institutes of Health says that we shouldn't put children younger than the age of 2 on a low-fat diet. This is a time of tremendous growth, particularly brain growth. The first 5 years of life, we're supposed to lay down almost all of our brain tissue. And the brain is primarily an organ that's made of fats. So you go from a diet that's initially 50% fat, in other words, human breast milk, to the kind of diet that I recommend, which is a starch-based diet, which is about, let's just guess 10% fat. That transition between human breast milk and, the food for adults is one that takes place over a period of about 2 to 3 years. But that's the way the pattern of breastfeeding should be also, is you exclusively breastfeed for the first 6 months. No water, no juice, no nothing, just breast milk for the first 6 months of life. And then after that, the baby starts to consume foods that are on your dinner plate, they've got teeth at 6 months of age. They've got hands they can reach out and grab. So they're still going to continue the breast milk. Remember, it's 50% fat. And they're going to consume another portion of their meal plan that's 10% fat. They're still on a high-fat diet. Now, if you do something that's not in the best interest of the mother or the baby, which is you stop the breast milk too early. You don't want to feed a diet that is, a diet just of rice and potatoes and so on. That's not enough fat. So in that circumstance, I would suggest that the mother figure out some type of other high-fat foods to feed the baby. I don't know. We run into a situation where how do you make something right that is so wrong? And when you stop the breast milk, you put you and the baby behind a tremendous amount of risk. And, to try and compensate it by, say, adding, some tahini or, peanut butter or, other sorts of high-fat food is a juggling game. I don't know how anybody can figure it out adequately, except somehow the human baby survives under a lot of adversity. But if you want to do things the easy way, the best chance of ending up you being in good health and the baby being in good health, you breastfeed for 6 months, a high-fat diet. The breast milk decreases over a period of 2 to 3 years, and the starches, vegetables, and fruits, they increase over the same period of time. That's the way a child is supposed to be fed. And then around 2 or 3 years of age, according to the National Institutes of Health and everything that I know, you get everything you need consuming a diet of potatoes and corn and rice and so on.
Very insightful.
But those first years of life are, if you decide you're not going to breastfeed, you've got a whole bunch of trouble ahead of you.
So a lot of women who say, doesn't my kid need more fat? Well, yes, your kid under the age of 2 or 3 does, and they get it from breast milk. So continue to breastfeed and wean into the McDougall style diet. So if young kids are, a group of people under the age of 2 that could benefit from higher fat, this is a great way to ask my next question about those that are struggling with infertility. The condition hypothalamic amenorrhea, when menstruation shuts down, the hypothalamus shuts down and stops sending gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which will stop the production of menses, and the menstrual cycle ceases because they're in an energy imbalance. They're either not eating enough, exercising too much, or a combination of both. It has been told in order to reverse this condition to eat higher fat foods, not just because the higher fat foods are more calories, but because the fat in and of itself is a requirement for the production of estrogen. What say you this?
What you're talking about situations of starvation, where there's not enough food in the environment, in the society, to support any further offspring. And so the body naturally shuts down, the ovary function stops. You see this in prisoner of war camps, for example. Women stop their menstrual period. Why? Because there's no room for any more people. And they go through a temporary amenorrhea. If there's not enough food, then the human female becomes anovulatory. In other words, they stop producing eggs. And when the food becomes available, then, the next signal is, okay, now it's time to have babies. And I think you were getting into something else that may be important. And that is that the fat cells do make estrogen. They take the adrenal hormones and they convert them into estrone, which is a fairly powerful female hormone that we see in dominance after a woman goes through menopause. Estrogen is the dominant female hormone. And, it's required for maturation, for the development of breasts and the uterus and so on. The problem with estrogen is that eating the Western diet increases the amount of estrogen in a woman's body by about 50%, more than she should have. So that means she overstimulates her estrogen-sensitive organs. They'd be the breasts, and she ends up with painful, inflamed breasts, which turn into fibrocystic breast disease. Overstimulates the breasts and encourages the growth of cancer. Overstimulates the uterus, and the beginning is what you see something called precocious puberty. Children become mature to the point where they can have children. They have menstrual periods, they have breast buds, pubic hair, etc. And that occurs, again, as the increase in estrogen that occurs as a consequence of the Western diet, from being too fat, from a whole bunch of other things that occur when you eat animal foods as opposed to plant foods. And most of these I've laid out in chapter 5 in the book that you showed. Thank you. It's about little girls going through puberty, which they go through at a much earlier age. And it tells you in that particular chapter where the different sources of estrogen are. So anyway, you start out with precocious puberty, so you end up having your children interested in sex when they're like 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, and they should be, at a stage where they're enjoying bicycles and checkers and their math book, and they're not. They're thinking about other things. And then this excess estrogen throughout life overstimulates the uterus, and the lining of the uterus, which is what you shed every month when you have your period. The lining grows too thick. And when it sheds a lot more blood than it would be expected. And you end up having blood clots and heavy menstrual periods. So that's one adverse effect. Through years and years of overstimulation of the body, the muscular part of the uterus, you end up growing tumors. They're called fibroids. Now, the nice thing about extra estrogen, and you probably have come to this conclusion, I'm sure you have, is that you have stronger bones. And one of the dilemmas in the scientific medical community has been the finding that women who have a high rate of breast cancer have a low rate of osteoporosis. But if you think about the estrogen connection there, it all makes sense. Estrogen stimulates the bones, but it also stimulates the breasts in a very negative way. So you want to get your estrogen down to where it should be, which you accomplish by eating a healthy diet and losing the excess body fat. And at the other end of your cycle, what happens is if you eat the Western diet with 50% more estrogen in your body as a consequence, you end up menstruating more years than you were intended. You go through menopause at, say, age 52, as opposed to age 48. At this exaggerated reproductive cycle, which causes you all kinds of troubles throughout your life, all the way from precocious puberty to delayed menopause, diseases of the breasts and the uterus, and so on. In fact, it's such a dramatic and common occurrence for women to be sick in terms of their reproductive organs that I don't know whether I should take this risk or not. Probably not. I've got to the point where I put together a lecture entitled "God Hates Women." Of course, it's a man, right?
Where do you say this?
And he hates women. And some of the reasons I come to that conclusion is because she's plagued by breast and uterus disease throughout her life. She can't deliver her babies normally through her birth canal. They got to be taken out through the abdomen, cesarean section. Obviously, doesn't give her a set of bones that lasts for a lifetime. No, the problem is the food. And women just happen to be more obviously affected by eating the wrong diet than, say, men may be. Or maybe we may pay more attention to women. I'm not sure what the social implications are. But certainly the medical business gets a lot of its customers from that particular gender. Women seem to be very much more involved in doctors and hospitals and sickness than men do. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for this. You could say because men just don't complain and women do. I think it's really because women are, they suffer terribly as a result of the Western diet. And most of the diseases that men suffer are pretty much hidden until the tragedy, until the heart attack or the stroke.
You mentioned something very insightful that I wasn't aware of until preparing for this interview, which was that caffeine consumption. Also, there's studies that show caffeine consumption will contribute to more bone loss, which I find interesting, and osteoporosis, but also that we store all of this calcium in our bones so that we can grow a baby. And then when we're no longer childbearing age, we don't need it anymore. We start to release it.
They lose their mineral content. Mm-hmm. So the strength of a bone comes from its components other than minerals. And what happens is, you said it well, but I'll just summarize it for our conversation, is that you store an extra 2 pounds of minerals to grow the baby in the uterus and also to feed the baby afterwards in terms of breast milk. So you store this extra mineral in your bones. What the medical business does is it tries to determine the strength of the bones based upon the mineral content. And so the test is done where they shoot photons through your bones. And if you have a lot of minerals in there, then the photons are going to be blocked. And you're going to get something called a bone mineral density as a result. But the bone strength doesn't come from the minerals. The minerals just kind of sit in the bone architecture. The strength of the bones comes from the fibrous structures. Let me give you an example, an analogy that I think most of you can relate to. Is if you take something that has a very high mineral content, and the highest mineral content I can think of is the chalk we used to use on the blackboard when I was in elementary school. It was solid mineral. I mean, think about that chalk pressing against a blackboard. Breaks pretty easily, doesn't it? And back in my old days, eating the Western diet, one of my favorite foods was chicken. And when I get done stripping the flesh off the chicken bones, you could take the bones and you could take and tie them in knots. They were so strong and fibrous. The strength comes from the tissues. The minerals just happen to reside in the tissues. And when and so I guess the point being is you don't have to lose the strength of your bones as you get older.
Yeah.
If you exercise, get sunshine, eat the right kind of diet, you'll maintain the strength. But you do lose the minerals because the body doesn't need to carry around an extra 2 pounds of minerals. You're not having babies after menopause.
So my friends after menopause who go and get their DEXA scan, they say, oh no, my bone mineral density is lower. You say, well, of course it's lower because of the conversation we just had. That doesn't mean that they are weaker. And I know that you've noted that by eating McDougall style diet, your bones could even get stronger.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The studies show that if you take a look at women 65 years of age or older, about 70% of them will flunk the bone mineral density test.
Yeah.
And again, it's getting back to some basic observations. Does God hate women? When 70% of them after the age of 65 can't pass a test designed by the companies that sell products related to estrogen, to selling estrogens and tests and so on. They devised the bone mineral density test a long time ago. Anyway, when 70% of women after the age of 65 have a particular finding, it must be normal. Or the female design is really, really flawed. I just don't seem to buy that.
Well, these women as well, I work with a lot of women around this age. Hormone replacement therapy is something that's often talked about, and you've talked at length about it. I'm not a fan of the oral hormone replacement therapy because my clients are trying to lose weight, and that does make weight loss more difficult. But you have talked about some creams that can be used because the vaginal wall goes from being about 7 cells thick, I believe, down to 1 cell thick. Is that correct? Which can lead to painful sex or incontinence. And so my question is this: with using hormone replacement therapy as a cream used topically, can the absorption of that inhibit weight loss?
But the best way to apply to get extra estrogen into the body is through the skin. I've never run into a problem of women who either gaining or losing weight. The absorption difference is about 30-fold. In other words, for the same dose of estrogen you take as a pill, you can take the same dose and put it on the skin and have it absorbed 30 times greater. The other thing that's really important has to do with something called first pass kinetics, which is where when you swallow a pill, the estrogen goes into the gastrointestinal tract and then it goes into the bloodstream and it's filtered through the liver. First pass kinetics is what it's called. It's filtered through the liver, and the liver changes the estrogens. It makes all kinds of different estrogens, increases and decreases the amounts of various estrogens. So you never know what you're getting out of the liver. When you give the hormone through the skin, then it affects the tissues, the skin, the breast, the uterus, etc., before it goes to the liver. So in that way, it's much more potent and it's much more reliable as to the correlation between what you're trying to accomplish by giving a particular combination or dose of female hormones and the results you get. So yeah, I use skin creams, and I use them. I use the natural hormone that a woman produces out of her ovaries called estradiol, and I add a little progesterone to that. Occasionally, a woman will ask me, and I do prescribe these creams, not often, but this is a concern that women have about menopause, and they're having some symptoms and hot flashes and feelings. Their well-being is not very high, and they're having a tough time. So I'll prescribe the hormones, and occasionally, and it's usually when the husband visits along with the wife, she'll ask about testosterone, and sometimes I'll add testosterone to the preparation, but it's not for the reason that that the couple is thinking about. Somehow they think that adding testosterone is going to increase her interest in sex, libido. And I've never seen this to be, at least in the limited patients I've seen, to be an outcome of adding testosterone. What I have seen is that when you add testosterone to the hormone preparation, is that the women start to smell like men. And a good share of sexual attractiveness, if not most of it, is smell. It's not sight. It's the way you smell to another person. Communicates a closeness that has tied to sexual desire. And the perfume industry knows this very well. They make billions of dollars selling scents that are supposed to cover up the stink of the Western diet and somehow make you attractive. Smell is good. And it's too bad in our society that we've spent so much time taking away an odor that is much appreciated during close contact. But of course, if you're going to eat the Western diet, then you're going to end up smelling like dead animals. And that's something that your brain doesn't relate to well at all. But if you eat a healthy diet, a starch-based diet, you end up smelling like a human male or female should smell like. We produce odors that are strong in the effect it has on our brain. We fall in love based on smell, not sight, but smell. So it's unfortunate what we've been taught. You do need to stink.
Yeah. And, just circling back to the idea of the hormone replacement therapy, I've heard you say, and I talk about this with my clients as well, that in the Japanese culture, the word hot flash did not come about until the Western diet made its way into Japanese culture. So I always urge people, let's try the diet first and let's see how that alleviates the hot flashes and alleviates these symptoms, and then look into something like a cream-based hormone replacement therapy.
The three things that have no adverse effects. I know you want to know this. You're sitting there, is he going to tell me what three things don't have adverse effects? And they are clean air, clean water, and clean food. What we teach is what we believe is clean food. There's no adverse effects.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a couple more questions and then I'll let you go? Thank you. Okay, so talking a little bit about our beloved potato, I think I'm in the running for most potatoes eaten in the year 2023. I live off of them. Must be my Irish genes. So my question is, you've noted, you could live off of just potatoes alone. I'm talking about the movie The Martian, where he lives on just potatoes alone. When we look at gut health, and Dr. Will Bolsowitz talks about this, that the diversity of plant foods is a leading contributor to who has the healthiest gut. So if one were to live off of a diet of just potatoes, how would they ensure that they have a diverse gut microbiome?
Where this comes about is there are like 400 different species of bacteria, and there are viruses and parasites and all kinds of things living in the gut. The gut is actually an organ. It communicates with your immune system. It makes various vitamins. So some of your vitamins are made by the bacteria in the gut. It further digests the food. What was observed is that people who have very low rates of heart disease, like, for example, the rural Africans, or breast cancer or colon cancer, what they observed is that their microbiome, what inhabits their gut, is quite different than say people who eat the Western diet. And what has turned out, and there's partial truth to this, is that these gut bacteria have a very important influence on your health. But I think what's left out too often is how you get these good gut bacteria. The way you get them is you feed them well. The kind of bacteria you have growing in your gut are dependent upon the food that you offer them. And what they like to eat is sugar. They're called oligosaccharides. They're sold to you as prebiotics in the natural food store. But they're also what's found in potatoes and rice and corn. So if you eat that kind of diet, as the rural Africans did, what I would call the McDougall diet, if you want to summarize it, then you end up with having a good realm of bacteria. But that's secondary to the fact that you eat good food. You may have a low incidence of breast and prostate and colon cancer, but that's secondary to eating the good food. All these things kind of go together. Unfortunately, what people are thinking is that all I have to do is figure out how to make the right bacteria grow in my bowel. And so they have something called probiotics, which are combinations of bacteria that have been invented by people in laboratories where they've decided that these are the bacteria you need to have growing in your gut. They don't have it right. I assure you of that. And they won't get it right. Probably the closest they'll come to getting it right is, and I'm not joking about this, there are actually people are looking at this as a business adventure, and that is selling rural African poop in capsules so you can grow the right bacteria. But those bacteria are not going to stay if you don't feed them right. So if you want those bacteria to continue to live in your gut, then you have to feed them what they like to eat, which is starch, sugar. If you feed them meat and cheese, they're going to die. They're going to go away. The bad guys are going to inhibit your gut. So again, it comes back to the basic issue here, which is it's the food. If you fix the food, not only do you lose the weight, you also have a great bowel movement. Not only do you drop your cholesterol, but your blood sugar comes down. All the positive things that you desire are based upon making a simple change. And that is I assume most of your listeners are raised on the Western diet, just like I was. Make the decision you're going to live on a diet that people consume that's associated with how I want to be, how I want to look, how my life wants to go. And you'll quickly come to the conclusion that people who live on a starch-based diet have throughout all of human history had the kind of characteristics that I want. I want to be fast. I want to have endurance. I want to be trim. I want my joints and bones and everything to not hurt. Those are the things I want. I want to live as long as I can, to look as good as I can, to smell as attractive as I can. And what you need to do is just fix the food. It's just the food. It's just the darn food. That's all you have to do. And everything comes up positive. Not only are you helping yourself and your family, but, the kindness stands, the end of the cruelty that's going on in our stockyards, and saving the planet might be of interest to you too.
Yeah.
And which is something I've dedicated a lot of my recent time to, is trying to get people to understand that what they eat has a direct impact on they call it global boiling now. It's not global warming anymore. It's global boiling. Look outside. And the kind of food that you eat, you have to realize, is the major contributor to global boiling. And that is from the animal agriculture. The animal agriculture business accounts for over half the greenhouse gases. You will need to know as an individual that the change you make does count. You can overnight, by switching to they call it a vegan diet, I call it a starch-based diet, you can cut your CO2 contribution overnight by 80%. So, we have a part to play individually, but we also have a revolution that we have to start. And that of course, and we do have to start. I don't see it happening yet. Even though the emergency couldn't be greater than what's going on right now. It's just so sad, particularly for people younger than Mary and I are. It gets tough sometimes for me as a grandfather to realize what's going on and to see how helpless everybody is. But you're not totally helpless. You get an electric vehicle, you are very conservative about your energy, etc. You change your diet to one that dramatically cuts the CO2 production. And in the meantime, we make this place habitable by cutting down on the temperature. We've got to cut down on the temperature. And this is a way to do it.
Well, thank you so much. This was terrific. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm so appreciative of your time.
Well, you're obviously a very dedicated person. Have you thought about going to medical school?
I think I have the conscientiousness to do it.
It's not too late. And I would say the same thing to you. Why don't you do it? You obviously have the passion and the knowledge, and you're smart enough and you got good skills. So
thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. McDougall, for coming. If you want to see more of Dr. McDougall on this channel, then comment the word encore and maybe we'll make it happen. If you've forgotten who I am, hey, it's all right. I'm Healthy Emmie, nutritionist, weight loss specialist, creator of the Slim on Starch program. If you want to work directly with me and my team so that you can get hands-on help with your weight loss journey on a starch-based, plant-based diet, then just click the link in the description bar. I love you, honeys. I look forward to seeing that comment, and I'll see you in my next video.